Hello. Hello. Welcome to Civilization Jihad Awareness, the show where truth wins every time. And I just want to tell you a little bit about this name, Civilization Jihad. It doesn't come from something I created. It comes from a term created by the Muslim Brotherhood to describe their war against North America. Yes, it is a war that they have declared back in 1991. And, we only discovered this, the public only discovered this in 2007, unfortunately, because the government kept it hidden for a few years after they discovered this. And they still aren't out there telling people that the Muslim Brotherhood in North America has declared war on us. But where do I get this from? This is from a document called the Explanatory Memorandum, and I'm just going to read one paragraph from it. The process of settlement is a civilization jihadist process with all the word means. The Ikhwan, which means brotherhood, must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house by their hands and the hands of the believers, so that it is eliminated and God's religion is made victorious over all other religions. Without this level of understanding, we are not up to this challenge and have not prepared ourselves for jihad yet. It is a Muslim's destiny to perform jihad and work wherever he is and wherever he lands, until the final hour comes. And there is no escape from that destiny except for those who choose to slack. But would the slackers and the mujahideen be equal? Tonight, we have a chance to listen to one of those great patriots who has served this country greatly. We have Dr. Monique Chouraeshkenazi with us tonight. Now, I'm just going to read a little bit of her bio and have her join us because she's quite something. I've looked at a couple places to try and see what would be good for reading her bio. I had her send me stuff, and I'm just kind of surprised. Some of these things I wish I had known somehow before, like I did not know she was. I'm going to read you a little bit from the Wikipedia, and then I'm going to read from the back of her jacket because there's some things here that I think people need to hear. I don't usually like Wikipedia, but this one is pretty good. Dr. Monique Marie Chouraeshkenazi was born November 6, 1983. She's an African-American Jewish author, professor, researcher, and Homeland National Security expert. She's an associate professor for the School of Security and Global Studies at American Public University System, an expert in the study of advanced scientific terrorism notations and Homeland and National Security methodologies. Chouraeshkenazi specializes in domestic extremism and global terrorism. In April 2017, Chouraeshkenazi is the first academic scholar to grace Oxford University's Press Elite Magazine Special Edition for Tier of Excellence in Personal and Professional Development as an educator, entrepreneur, and leader in Homeland and National Security. And tonight we are going to be talking to her about her book, Homeland and National Security, Understanding America's Past to Protect the Future. And, excuse me, here we go. Welcome, Dr. Chouraeshkenazi. I did forget to say one thing about her that I should. She has a new show out on YouTube. It's called The Dr. Mo Show. So I'm going to try and say Dr. Mo tonight. So welcome, Dr. Monique.
Thank you for having me.
So I'm going to try and say Dr. Mo. It's going to be hard for me because I'm not used to referring to a woman as Mo, but we'll see how this goes. I read your book. I was highly, highly impressed with a number of things. And what really gets me, this textbook you shared with me, is I'm just going to go back and read what I have here. It's an honor to have you. Back when we first talked, you shared that you have a textbook coming out, Homeland and National Security, Understanding America's Past to Protect the Future. Anyone familiar with the concept of Islamization of knowledge should be giving you a standing ovation for the title, because that's one of the things they're trying to change is our history. As a graduate of Henley Putnam in intelligence analysis and as an educator, which primarily work in social studies, I found this book fascinating because it addresses several issues that are very important both historically and in present world reality. So, Dr. Mo, I'm hoping this works. I'm going to try saying that again. Please tell our listeners what gave you the idea to incorporate American history into a national security textbook.
So in the beginning, as a professor, I always knew at some point I wanted to write my own textbook. And I knew it was going to be in national security, but it was one of those things where actually being in the military and then being an educator, I realized that, Homeland and national security was being used as an interchangeable term. And with that said, we know, like, as you being a social studies teacher and me being in security, we both know, like, Homeland and national security are two different things. And being used interchangeably is not conducive to understanding the initiatives and practices that we need to do to protect our homeland. So I got the idea, like, I want to write about national and homeland security because I want my students to know the difference between the two, as well as understand the overlapping responsibilities of both concepts. But I knew in order for me to do so, I had to go back in history so they would understand how the conceptualization of national security even occurred. So going back and researching historical conflicts, events, victories, agreements between America and other countries, I felt like it was very important for me to do that so students could understand where we were, what happened, and, how national security was even established so they can understand the things that we do today and what we do in the future, has an influence from our past. So that's why I decided to add the historical part to the textbook.
And she goes back in her textbook and she not only adds how the original points for national security and where they come from, but she talks about American history. Purpose is there's a preservation here. That's one of the agendas of national security. Am I right?
Exactly.
And that to me that has me so excited, just the concept of that. To see that somebody in national security actually gets the importance of that. I've been trying to explain it to people for years. As a social studies teacher, the one thing I should tell you is we're seeing it change.
Right.
We're seeing our textbooks change, our history books change. We used to teach when I was in grade school that you had to be born in America to become a president. In the 1990s, they took that out of textbooks. And I have I can trace it back to the 1990s is when it was taken out of textbooks. I have textbooks, it's like 1999, one of those years that it was taken out, those last few years. I actually have textbooks that were like from 1990, mid-1990s that have it still in. So that's a concern. I mean, that's again, a national security issue if you stop telling people the truth about what was believed by our founders.
Right.
And that gets into the next question. One of the things most people probably do not think about is that our founding fathers gave national security some thought. I like your book, that your book looks into the beginnings of the concept. Can you tell us about your research on this?
Okay. Like, as I mentioned in the beginning, I knew I wanted to revert to explain the conceptualization of national security. And it all began with our founding fathers. When they began drafting the Declaration of Independence, I believe each man knew the historical feat that was protecting what is now known as the United States from future international threats. When America defeated Great Britain, these prominent figures, they recognized that something had to be in place to ensure that was prevented. So the Declaration of Independence, to me, is essentially the birth of national security. I took pride in going back to student mode to do my due diligence of re-educating myself on our history and really understanding why, national security objectives were needed. It wasn't just about recognizing our country as being autonomous from British rule, but it was also about making that global stance to show other countries that, yes, now we have policies in place. And if anyone decides to infiltrate in or, comprise this country's security protections, now there are consequences. So that was like the main reason why I added the founding fathers. I thought it was really important. You have to go to the very beginning, and the very beginning is when these important people who drafted the Declaration, essentially establishing the United States of America as a autonomous country. It was really important to understand their mindset, why they did what they did to essentially establish national security objectives.
I'm going to be thanking you throughout the show for doing this, because I'm amazed with what kids don't know in their 20s. And I'm guessing you get kids, various ages, because I think one of your schools is mostly online. And I'm just amazed with what people don't know about history. And then to go into national security not without a concept that you actually have a duty to protect our history too is something very, very important that young people or older people need to understand. One of the documents you talk about is the National Security Act of 1947. Can you tell the listeners what this document did for America during the Cold War?
Well, first, just to give you a brief background on the Cold War, for those who don't know, I consider this the unnerving political hostility between the United States and the Soviet Union that lasted nearly 50 years. After WW2, the United States and the Soviet Union were primarily the two superpowers of the world. It created constant tension because, as we all know, the United States and the Soviet Union, now Russia, have major political and economic differences. Because this wasn't, it wasn't considered at the time any declaration of a full war or a declaration of war between the two countries. It was also known as the Cold War, and that's what leads to the National Security Act of 1947. We basically have this document that is so relevant today that was established by President Truman, and it totally restructured our military. Because after WW1 and WW2, you take a look back at the lessons learned, the things that happened, the challenges that were at stake. If you look back and from lessons learned, you try to develop policies that will change the way you operate, change the way you think, and how, when it comes to military actions, how as a country you're going to actually respond to a next threat that may happen. So the NSA of 1947 was really responsible for restructuring our military and our intelligence agencies after the war. And, a lot of students that I talk to, whether it's, I talk to a lot of high school students who think about going into national security or history or homeland security, they really didn't know that the NSA was responsible for establishing all the departments for the military branches. Like, they didn't even know that the Air Force was part of the Army at one point, and that this act alone had separated the Air Force to become its own entity and become the Department of the Air Force. And we had a Department of the Navy, who was attached to the Department of the War, and then developed the Department of the Navy, where the Marines fall under. And not only was that act responsible for that, it was also responsible for establishing our national military establishment, which is now known as the Department of Defense, and created that first position, Secretary of Defense, where James Forrestal was the first Secretary of Defense to run our nation from a defense standpoint back in this time. And not only were those, historical feats considered successful, the act established the National Security Council, which is responsible for having top cabinet-level leaders advise the president on all national security issues. And then, most importantly, we established our first non-military intelligence agency, which was the CIA, whose primary responsibility, is generating and producing intelligence from a broad perspective. So the NSA, along with the Marshall Plan and Truman Doctrine, were major policies developed during the presidential era of President Truman to be set in stone major policies during the Cold War. That was like the primary strategy for handling the Cold War.
I find this fascinating for a couple of reasons that this was done under Truman. working in public schools, I hear some of the meanness said about a man who ordered the dropping of the atomic bombs on Japan. And one of the mean things they talk about that I've heard, and I haven't done the research on this to verify it, is that Truman didn't go to college, so he couldn't know any better. But we really didn't know what it was going to do. I'll say that much. But this act alone is probably one of the most important academic acts that have been done for the betterment of the country, I think.
I agree.
I want to say this, Dr. Mo here is probably one of the bundles of energy that you probably don't understand has served her country well with honor. 13 years in the military while I'm saying this, and she's lived this. A lot of what she's talking about. She served the Secretary of Defense, Dr. Ashton Carter. So I just want to make sure that people understand she's not just talking academics. She's actually lived it. So we want to give her thanks for doing that. And I'll go on. Your section on national interests was very interesting. Your former boss, SecDef Ashton Carter, is cited here saying North Korea's unchecked attempts to build a nuclear arsenal was one of the main threats. Mm-hmm. I have to ask if you think his comments directed President Trump to place negotiations and attempts to create a relationship with North Korea. Do you think this was SecDef Carter's comments helped guide President Trump?
To be honest, and people might not like what I say, but to be honest, I'm not sure if Secretary Carter's comments made an impact on President Trump's decision to extend the olive branch to North Korea. I mean, you have to think about when those statements were made circa 2011. President Trump became president in 2017. And I also think about Secretary Carter's background, which is predicated on over 30 years of experience in the Department of Defense alone. His extensive background in physics and writing numerous books on nuclear weapons and preventative measures against nuclear weapons. And essentially you have a president, to me, in my opinion, maybe relationships are more important. I think he kind of leaned towards President Kim Jong-un, and I don't know if really the nuclear weapon program, I know it's something that he wants to work with North Korea to ensure that, we mitigate the proliferation of nuclear weapons, but I don't know if it was because of the fact that he was the first president to really sit down and say, hey, we're going to have this positive relationship and agree that we're going to stop making nuclear weapons. We're going to disarm certain programs and stuff for you so we can, have a safer world. I'm not sure. I really don't know the comments because I tried to do research to see if there was any connection between Secretary Carter's comments and, President Trump's decision, and I couldn't find anything. So I really can't answer that question. But based on what I know, what I've seen, I know when you're looking at research and background and experience versus a commander-in-chief that doesn't necessarily have a background in government or understand the idiosyncrasies of programs as complex as nuclear weapons, I don't know what was, his reasoning for wanting to extend positive relations with North Korea.
I wouldn't be surprised if some of his advisors some of the people I know that have at least shown up as advisors for him, some of them I've met wouldn't probably know some of what the Dr. Carter's words were at the time, but I do know they held the same opinion as him, as that North Korea was a big, huge problem. Mm-hmm. So I would not be surprised if his words are somewhat prophetic in an attempt to create this relationship that is, as he said in the beginning, it's going to take a long time. So
I think, if anybody, even President Obama, he said if he was offered the opportunity, he would sit and negotiate and talk to the president of North Korea to come to some conclusion to disarm nuclear weapons. So it's not about, whether the words were there to like what you really think. I think anybody who sits in that position understands like nuclear weapons is a serious issue, and if we can do whatever it takes to have conversations, I think anybody who wants better for America would take that opportunity. I know if I was the president, I would sit down with him and discuss it. So you never know.
I'm going to be interested to see how the next few years go and see if everything, all the nuclear program over there does end. As I think we can all hope for that. Yeah. Let's see. Your book talks about the importance of national interests guiding America's national security principles. I want to know what you see as America's national interest. In your book, you mentioned that what some others thought our national interests are. So what do you think our national interests are?
You know, I believe our national interests are anything that preserves our security protections, number one. Anything that violates or threatens our global relationship building, you know, economic security, political identity of the United States, I consider, you know, that a national risk. I've been very vocal about top national security and homeland security issues, and I feel like the national security issues that I've been discussing for the past 4 or 5 years, they're still relevant today. And I feel like these issues significantly impact our national interests. And, you know, just to give you a few, relationships with our allies, coalition forces, and our security partners have been significantly tensioned, you know, very contentious relationships, and I think we need to focus on building those relationships, restoring those relationships, fixing it, because we can't do it alone. Right now, the United States, we're in turmoil, but we're still considered the superpower of the world, but we didn't become the superpower of the world alone. We got to where we are by having strong relationships with international countries. And if we don't fix those relationships, we're going to be alienated. And being alienated is definitely a security risk. Troops withdrawn from Syria, you know, our issues with North Korea, Russia, and China, transnational terrorism, human trafficking. All these issues are national security issues that, you know, I know they're not overlooked. There's something, they're definitely dealing with these issues, but because we have so much internal, what I call homeland security issues, is definitely taking a sidestep to what we currently have going on in America.
In this section, you say it is critical that the United States upholds its national values and defends the law of democratic governance. I think this is one of a couple areas I'm not sure if I agree with you on. I'm interested to hear what you mean by the statement. Are you saying it's America's job to make the world a place for democracy?
So what I meant when I wrote that, what I meant about defending the law of democratic governance, is I believe the United States is founded on that political paradigm alone. Therefore, it's our responsibility to protect it. As a superpower of the world, I definitely believe it's our due diligence to assist other countries who seek democratic governance. What I basically mean by that is any country that seeks to have what we have, that wants a democratic government, I feel like it's our due diligence to help as a leading nation. I don't believe it's our business and our authority to go into countries and force it. It's a total difference. You know, I don't think we should go and make any, you know, every country in the world democratic because they are who they are. Just like people, you can't force friendships on people because different cultures, different societal backgrounds. We shouldn't be going as a superpower, going in and putting our noses where it don't belong because we're a certain way and now we're trying to force our culture and our political values on another country. No, that's not what I mean. You know,
okay.
But at the same time, you know, I feel with the chaos that's going on within our eternal political system, it's difficult for us to really delineate if we're still upholding these democratic values. So that's kind of what I mean when I wrote that.
Okay, so I was kind of taking it that we were kind of pushing democratic governance, and that's one of the things. Like, if you're, I mean, as familiar as you are with Islamic countries, I don't see democracy as being even feasible. There may be a slim form of it, but it's not really compatible with Islamic life. So that's one of the things I didn't agree with Bush's statement making it safe for democracy over there. But I think that was one of his mistakes, and claimed mistakes, I should say. Because I think I don't know if he's ever going to own up to that, but he for sure said it. Okay. Let's see. Wow, we're getting through these. I didn't expect to go through these. Let's see. As I got deeper into your text, I started to smile as I saw areas where historical knowledge were paramount. One of the sections was on weapons of mass destruction. Here you discussed the importance of deterrence, but you had other strategies. Can you share about that?
Yes. So in addition to what I wrote on the weapons of mass destruction, when we've discussed that, it's really highlighted on nuclear weapons. I also added burning weapons and preventative measures as a strategy that's all-inclusive to include, nuclear weapons. And for those who don't know, burning stands for chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and explosive weapons. I believe this is something that's overlooked when it comes to national security threats because we focus so much on terrorism. Ever since 9/11, our focus has been on terrorism. But now we have internal threats inside our country where we're dealing with hate crimes and active shooting incidents, political violence, and so forth, that once again, Bernie seems to be on that back burner where we don't really talk about it. We definitely have a lot of agencies and a lot of offices responsible for preparedness, awareness, training, stuff like that. But we really don't talk about it in the media because we're so focused on the other threats. When I first saw the bio attack that immediately happened after 9/11, I realized that, I was a teenager when that happened. So I was a senior in high school, and I realized even back then we weren't ready for an anthrax attack. Just like in 2014 when we had the Ebola outbreak, we weren't ready for that either. So that's why I added additional strategies to the weapons of mass destruction because I wanted there to be preparedness and situational awareness that, hey, we have these threats, they're huge, but, Bernie is just as important too, and it needs to be discussed because, if we're focused on all these internal threats and the common threats that we see in the media and the government speak about, but then we're not prepared for Bernie, it could be definitely a high-risk national security threat.
Now, what I liked about this is also that you talked about methodologies of how this is one of the things this book. It's an understatement of what this book does. While you're an established expert on methodologies, but you explain things in this book like a student of philosophy. Break things down to the simple, and that's what you do in this book. Now, I'm kind of impressed because that's one of the things I was taught to do as a student of philosophy. How do you break things down to the very basic steps? And you do that going through each department. It's very, very well done. This book also defines national security, unlike national security historically. We've been saying this throughout our interview here, but this has got to be said. The book defines national security historically, unlike any other book I've seen on the topic. You go over the FBI's mission and the Department of Justice's assigned priorities for the FBI. You gloss over one important item that I discovered when I was studying intelligence analysis. It's amazing. How does the FBI view terrorism versus how intelligence communities view terrorism? I want to talk about this because this to me was mind-blowing when I was just as a student just learning this, and to me this is extremely important. People need to know this.
So, that's a great question because as you can see in the book, I think the first 4 or 5 pages of that chapter on American terrorism just go by the definitions alone based on scholars, experts, agencies, even the European Union, all these different agencies and people who define terrorism, and they define it in a different way. And what I think about the FBI, they have a broader definition of terrorism than most entities and scholars, because I think over the last 17 years, as we've seen terrorism hit our American soil, that you have to be a little bit broader when you're describing terrorism. With the FBI, to me, I think they're more broader in the population, because it's not necessarily targeting just the government, it's targeting innocent people. You know, there's terrorist attacks that happen. You can walk to your store, a building blows up, and then a terrorist group is claiming responsibility for that attack. So with the FBI, they made it very broad on who the victims are and who the perpetrators are. But they did also include that, you know, it's intimidation and premeditation by a political or social objective. When you look at the intelligence agencies, I feel like it's more narrowed, and I think it's based off of, you know, military culture. When I think of intelligent communities, because they're so closely related to the military, they're very straightforward in their definitions, and they basically focus it on basically subnational groups, and they're very specific about who the terrorists are. And 17 years later, looking back, I feel like you need to broaden the definitions a little bit, because it's not just groups and secret agents that are committing acts of terrorism. It is lone wolves, homegrown terrorists, active shooters, political activists that are creating terroristic attacks. And if you look in the book on page 204, you'll see my own definition. You do address that. I do address it, and I make it even broader, because I wanted to let people know, like, terrorism today is not just based on political ideologies. It's based on religion. It's based on social environment. There's different reasons why people commit terrorist attacks, and it's not just based on political issues. And it's not just terrorist groups. It's loners that feel like they need to be martyrs and make a statement against for things that they personally believe in. And that's why I created another definition to make it even broader.
And this is the big thing I see in the FBI definition that's different than anybody else's, is that they focus on terrorism in the sense of crime.
Yes,
and that is the huge difference that I see. And when I wrote a piece a ways back trying to get, what I intended to do was to say, look, is the FBI ready to address the Muslim Brotherhood here within the United States? But my thoughts originally, until I went to school, was that this was all terrorism. And what I've learned is there's a difference between terrorism and sedition. and that's where we're at. That's a question I'll be asking in a little while. Wow, I don't believe we got this far. I didn't think we were going to. I'm going to go on. I've got a couple more questions.
Okay.
Wow, my studies in intelligence analysis covered the various changes in the structure of the DHS and the intelligence agencies. Your book thoroughly addresses this, and between the two of them, they're almost, in many ways, they cover the exact same stuff, and it's. I mean, your book is an easy read for a person who's supposed to be taking. I'm not saying it's written lower, but if you're taking a class in an introductory class, or I don't know if this is undergrad, this is geared toward, or graduate, this is going to be easier to read than what I had to, and I thank you for that. But you talk about interdepartmental competitiveness and a lack of communication between agencies, creating a need for change. Has the creation of the DHS improved interagency cooperation?
Okay, can I just piggyback on what you just said, and then I'll answer your question. When it comes to, I'm not insulted in any way by you saying it's an easy read, because that was the whole purpose of the book. I wanted people to understand basic level our history, and then understand national and homeland security concepts. So I wanted to make it easy for graduates, because they use my book in graduate school. You can also use this book in high school. I think it's very important that high school students understand this background as well. So definitely not offended. But your question on has, the changes of interdepartmental competitiveness, has it changed since DHS hasn't been established? And I would say yes, because before 9/11 happened, we didn't have an agency that was just primarily responsible for American protections. And when I say that, I'm talking about protecting our homeland. You had Department of Justice, where you have the FBI, and you have Department of Defense, who's responsible for the armed forces, protecting national security for abroad. We didn't have anything delineated towards protecting our homeland. We had a bunch of agencies, but now having DHS and having those agencies combined as an umbrella to protect our nation from within, I think has significantly improved a lot of processes that we probably had challenges with in before 9/11. You know, we have fusion centers now, which improve communication and information sharing processes, not only at a national level, but at a local level. You have state, local, and federal fusion centers that are responsible for law enforcement, military, intel, coming together and sharing information, primarily when it comes to terrorist attacks or any information like when we had the USA Patriot Act of 2001. Is basically predicated off of that act that these people come together, these different agencies come together and they share the communication and information to prevent another 9/11 from happening. Because as you know, one of the limiting factors, which was the main factor, was there wasn't communication among agencies that could have prevented 9/11. There was information that the CIA knew that the FBI didn't. FBI knew information that the CIA didn't. Even the federal government and the presidential administration, the Bush administration at the time, they had information. Nobody was talking together effectively, and there was information that was overlooked that could possibly prevent 9/11. So I think creating DHS, it was created in haste and had a lot of bugs in the beginning, but as we're getting further and further down the line, I think it's really improving processes between agencies and communicating and getting that important information out there.
I want to have you defined a fusion center. I know what it is, but I just want to make sure our listeners get a clue as to what a fusion center is.
So a fusion center is basically, we call them cells, weirdly, because when you think of cells, you think of the terrorist cells. But they're basically cells at different levels, like I said, local, state, federal levels, and you have experts that work in these fusion centers, and they're solely responsible for generating, communicating, and passing information to other agencies when it comes to crime, Homeland National Security issues, and they are better improving their processes among the United States to ensure that Homeland and national security is protected, as well as getting the proper information out to the federal government and the presidential administration on certain issues when it comes to terrorism.
Do fusion centers like read your personal communications and stuff like that? Actually, I had someone just ask that in the chat room.
Well, I don't think it's the fusion centers. You got to think. I know what your one of your listeners are asking. Basically, under the Patriot Act, yes, it was legal to listen on conversations, but it was only to people who were suspected or people connected to people suspected of being in terroristic activities. So with the fusion centers, I'm not going to definitively say no, they don't listen, because I'm not sure, but that shouldn't be one of their responsibilities. I think that's a different agency that's responsible for doing that, and now they're even stricter on those communications. If you realize that Patriot Act was actually revised, and now the Freedom Act of 2015 made it more stricter for having civil liberty and privacy act violations when it comes to listening on conversations or having access to information unless there was definitive
That's
information.
more the listening stuff is more NSA. It's not
right.
Yeah, and fusion, I mean, the purpose of fusion, from what I've learned, is to combine different types of intelligence to make it available to different levels, like you were saying, country, state, local, whatever it needs. And when we're talking about different kinds of intelligence, there's like open source. It can go on and on. There's just so many different kinds of intelligence. And believe it or not, guys, everybody who's listening right now, you're using one of them, open source. And this is a form of it.
You're right. When it comes to the FISA court issues, they deal with all the stuff that's under the Patriot and, the Freedom Act. But Views and centers, like you said, their primary responsibility is developing, generating intelligence. It's like their own different epaulet of intelligence agencies that better connects the military, intel, and law enforcement.
So I'm sorry, trying to respond to somebody in there. Okay, so let me go on. You also wrote a nice piece about what FEMA is, what it does, and I should say what it should be doing. I'm a CERT member. I went through the training, it was a couple of months, so someday maybe I'll get activated, who knows, but I found that training fascinating too. So I do try to give back. One of my last questions I have here, I didn't find sedition in your textbook. I went so far as to double check in the index if it's in there, and I missed it. I'm sorry. I think it's a crime and a topic that you either should add in your next book, which I'm sure you're going to write a new one. But I think it's an important topic that needs to be discussed in light of groups like the Muslim Brotherhood, who have declared war on us, and not only nationally, but the within our country they've declared war on us. So I would like to see that become. Do you actually talk about the concept of sedition when you address national security in your classroom?
Thank you for bringing that up, because that's something that we do not discuss in depth in my classes, but it's understood that, sedition is a major problem that happened within the 20th century, and it's something that I feel like is going to be a major problem for the United States. But in the 20th century, it was something that was really an issue with other countries, in which it is today. Possibly since our current threat with our administration, I'm going to be honest and let people know that with our presidential administration, there's more people that have been outspoken against this president more than any other president in history. So it's possible that our own.
That's not. Are you familiar with the? I get the name of this group. The Duquesne spy ring.
No, I'm not familiar with that group.
In this case, there were 19. These were Germans who got found in different levels of government in the United States. They were found guilty in December of 1941. It's interesting to see that, there were 19 infiltrations of our government. That's back in 1941. I have traced several positions that I've actually discussed for years now, that under the past president, that would be charged with sedition if it was 1941. But we don't. This is the thing that comes with sedition. We don't charge people with sedition unless we're at war. And that, to me, is it's one of the quirks of being in the United States. You can take advantage of us because we don't charge people with sedition unless you have your entity or whatever you're with has been recognized as officially having declared war on us. And that's, I think, one of the difficulties we have as a country. We haven't recognized a lot of people who in countries and entities who have declared war on us, so we can't arrest people for those things. And I don't know if that's
because I feel like now there's going to be people who will try to revolt against the American government, but if you're saying that they can't be charged with it unless they're at war, then that definitely is an issue. But I feel like that's something that's going to happen. The ones that you notated that happened back in the 20th century.
Well, under the last president, we had people like Janet Napolitano say, people who are fun-loving, are basically patriotic. You would have, you carried a gun, probably kept one at home. You might have been, and I said, I read this thing to my father, who is in his 80s, and he's like, "Oh my God, I'm being called a homegrown terrorist," because he loves his country. And this was, to me, that was a person who would be in a position of national security to make a statement like that was kind of surprising. But I almost consider that seditious to be in a position like that and to twist our freedoms against us, because that's what I consider the worst thing that happens during sedition. Yeah. But I want to say thank you. you have done your work. Your book is probably going to change a lot of how people teach national security. That's my hope, because history. Right now, we have to fight to keep our history. And as a social studies teacher and as a person who is writing now on topics like this, I can't tell you enough how important it is to fight to keep our history. And I have to thank you for that, because I think it's being quashed. I think our history is being changed right before our eyes. When I can tell you, I know that things are being taken out of our textbooks. I mean, I'm curious, when you went through high school, and if it was in 2001, I'm betting you never learned that you had to be born in America to become president, because it was removed from the textbooks before that. I mean, this stuff, to me, it's treasonous, seditious. I have all these statements I'd love to say about that, but this is where I think your combination of history and national security is extremely important. I want to say thank you for joining us, and we'll have to have you back in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Can you tell
very
people
much.
where they can find you? I forgot to ask you that. Can you tell people where they can find you?
Yes, you can find me on www.thedrmoshow.com. It's an academic blog site that I have where I update all the latest and greatest Homeland National Security updates, all types of stuff like that. You can find out what, interviews and stuff I'll be doing. So that's like the one-stop shop for me. You can also find my book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and my publishing site, which is www.cognella.com. Or you can also purchase my book through the Dr. Mo Show website.
Well, thank you. We'll have to have you back sometime in the future. God bless, and thank you for service. I just hope things go well for you. God bless.
Thank you. You too.
Wow. Interesting interview. I want to say she's phenomenal. We've been talking back and forth a little bit, and her book is really, really interesting. She does side a little on the liberal side, but I'll tell you, I think her concerns are primarily national security. And that's one of the reasons why I think her input is valuable. So I knew that going into this interview. I mean, the easy way to figure something like that out is to see that she's really proud of being under Dr. Ashton Carter. And, I read some good stuff by him, so I can't say anything. I was impressed by some of his work. And then you read some other stuff by other people that have written stuff for her book. It's impressive. The first Secretary of Defense the last Secretary of Defense under President Obama and who served until replaced under Trump wrote a recommendation for this book for her. That's impressive. That tells you, her service was not small to this country and still won't be. I think she's going to change some minds and hearts towards standing up for America, and I really like that. And for me to hear someone who leans on the liberal side, who understands what national security means, that's exciting to me.